Thank you, everyone. So, yes, so I'm here to start about the updates that we've done in genetic evaluation. And first of all, before we go into that, do I click this button? Yes.
That green one.
This one?
Yep.
Cool, okay. First of all, I would like to start with well, as you know, the New Zealand genetic evaluation runs every week and includes 11 million animals, including 500 genotypes as well. And it produces all our breeding values that we use for our breeding programs. And as Neville alluded to before, this evaluation is constantly under development. For the next advancement, what is next, we have to stay ahead of the game. And behind it is a massive team of very clever people. And they're working very hard to make this happen. So I would like to start this update with actually thanking those people that are actually working behind the scenes tirelessly to actually giving us the best evaluation possible. So first of all, I would like to say a special thank to Michael Lee, and he's sitting over there. And he is the main brain think behind it. He developed the GTA block that we run now on our analyses, which makes all these great things happen. And of course, he's supported by the very clever brains of Ken Dodds, Neville Jobson, and also Jason Archer. And then as Jason alluded to before, we have Timothy Bilton joining us as well as the young brain in our team. And then we also have Tim Jowett from University of Otago, who helps Michael with the humongous job of translating many years of code from SAS to R to actually make our elevation more efficient. And then Sharon, who is tirelessly always looks at the developments that the scientists have made, what are the changes, what flocks are affected, is it actually the effects that we see, is that what we expected? And then we have David, who makes all the computer stuff that goes behind the scene possible to make it all happen. And Cynthia, who runs the Cool Sheep program, who has funded a lot of this work as well. So very important people that are working tirelessly behind the scenes. So yes, I would like to thank them for that hard work. So before we move on, so here we go. So the last Sheep Breeder Forum, when we were all together here in 2024, the team of Beef and Lamb announced that they were going to roll out NZGE V6. And it was like the implementation of GTA BLUP, which stands for the Genomic Best Linear Unbiased Prediction Model, which is pretty much a very difficult way of saying it's a very sophisticated statistical model that calculates our breeding values. And I can say it's also, I would say, world leading in this space. So we're at the top of our game. So this GTA BLUP enabled us to actually include more genotypes into the analyses. So as Jason said before, it was able to combine the maternal and terminal breeds into one analysis because they were run separately before that. It also enabled other breeds that were not genomically enhanced yet to be included as well, to be part of that. And all that made it that the breeding values that we got out of the evaluation were more accurate, so we could make better breeding decisions. And also the GTA BLUP enabled was a better model for hard to measure traits. However, we didn't have lamb survival in there for that yet. So once this was rolled out in December 2024, and you breeders would all be happily using this, the team continued on the work with our next model, V7. So in a nutshell, the genetic evaluation version 7 is V6 plus lamb survival. So Michael and the team worked hard to get all the genomics included for the lamb survival trait. So again, that it would have the improved accuracies that we were seeing for the other traits. And next to including lamb survival, it also did some under the hood updates. And as I alluded to before, with the help of Tim, the translation of all the data from a very cumbersome and expensive SAS to a more open-sourced program called R. And this included, and of course, like that under the hood, you won't see the changes in the breeding values, but it actually does change a hell of a lot behind the scenes because it makes it faster and more efficient to run the system, which is really good. So what is next? So now we're working on our V8, and it's almost like we're in a car factory with all those Vs and stuff like that. So we're hoping to roll this out in August 2026. And this is, I'm hoping this is good news for the shedding breeders in the room, that we hope to have like a model to include into the NZGE weekly run for shedding. So shedding people can have breeding values updated every week. Because up until now it was run as a research trait and only run maybe once or twice a year. In addition to that, we will include, we hope to include the genomic information of all the shedding breeds as well. Next to the shedding information, we would like to include a new measurement for IMF via ultrasound. And although, as Jason alluded to it before, it's still a baby step, we would like, if the science team signs off on that, have that included into the evaluation as well. And next to all that, there are some under the hood updates as well. Again, progressing the translation of some of the data prep that goes on, and this in particular case for the connectedness data, to upgrade it from CES to R, and also updating allele frequencies, just to making sure that the selections that we haven't done and we haven't drifted away, so we're still making accurate genomic selection. So this is what's coming out next. Other things that we're working on, Neville alluded to it before when he said what he was doing, that every week before the breeding values are rolled out and are available to the breeders, the team checks the plots, the old versus the new weekly runs, and see if there's any changes happening. And there's a lot of information that goes into it, and sometimes we see changes, and now with the influence of genomics, it's like, wow, where do those changes come from? So we're looking at diagnostic software to help speed up looking at those changes and explaining those, so we can actually give you breeders faster feedback of the changes that you might observe. So that is it from me. I'm going to hand over to David now, who will talk to you about all the updates from nProve.
Thanks, Danny. So we'll share the latest updates on nProve, and then we'll move on and give you a bit of a view in terms of what's coming up. So I guess to recap, one of the big successes focused on what we've been rolling out to breeders and bureaus. It's been quick views. As you can see on the screen behind me, instant access to animal pedigree, trait and NZGE data, where you can quickly go in, change criteria, add or remove columns, change sorting, things like that. In this example, you'll see as well, how simple it is to pull that out, download it, open it up on your local machine in Excel, for continuing to work on that on your own machine. We're really stoked with how this has been going. Some really good work done by bureaus in terms of creating a lot of these base views that are being rolled out to breeders. And it's really, really cool to see some of the things that breeders are doing with this tool. A lot of them that we would not have predicted, and really quite inventive. So if you like the look of what you're seeing and you don't have access to quick views yet, have a chat to your bureau about that, getting access. Staying in the same space with what we're rolling out to breeders and bureaus, and staying in the same area, how to give you better access to your data and information. We've been rolling out report views. So look, these are a bit more complicated than a simple table of data like you saw before, with normal things you might expect to see in a report with different sections and groupings and subtotals and potentially graphs and things. The design process behind the reports, it's definitely a higher bar and more sophisticated. So we're working with bureaus in terms of the training and upskilling of them, and it's really good to see that and what the bureaus are doing with this tool as well in terms of rolling that out. But these are the types of reports that would be typically delivered to you in a PDF. So we've got basic things in there like selection lists and summaries, things like that. The pedigree trees are being rolled out at the moment. But there's also a bunch of other things we can do in that tool to do a better job of not just sort of drowning you in tables of numbers, but actually bring some of that to life with visualizations. We're definitely staying focused on making sure we get the basics out of the way first in terms of those fundamental reports that you need. But I'll talk a little bit in a minute in terms of starting to use some of those capabilities in the reporting tool as it relates to connectedness. So shifting gears, but staying in terms of sort of recent developments, but now looking at what we've been rolling out to on the public side of nProve, with commercial farmers as the key audience there. This is obviously where the tyre hits the road in terms of putting in the hands of commercial farmers the hard work of everyone in this room. The big thing I think everyone will have heard about is beef. With the support of a bunch of New Zealand beef breed societies, PBB, ABRI, Helical and a bunch of others. A really great collaboration there to be able to bring beef on board. We are beef and lamb, and it's really good to have that other part in there. The key fundamentals of that tool, though, were well established in the early work that we did with breeders. There were a bunch of key messages that we heard and put into the tool. Not making it a big drag race around a single index. That concept of really making sure that commercial farmers stopped, thought about what their requirements were, and went and used this tool to find what driveway to drive up, basically, or driveways, in terms of finding those genetics that were fit for their individual purpose. So you can see that's an example in sheep, but now if we start over, we'll pick beef, and yeah, what a really cool win in the fact that that messaging is exactly the same. I can go in, still want a good all-round animal, but then I can start to drill down into EBVs and get a bit more specific about what I actually need on my own individual farm. This is obviously a big win for commercial farmers, right? Like, once they know how to use the tool, they can use that consistently across multiple species. But it's also a big win for us at Beef and Lamb, and for the likes of Sarah that work with the considerable resource that we've got in our extension team, and also the external providers that we work, and that messaging is also now nice and consistent there. And it's also interesting when we look at the statistics in terms of the adoption and use of the tool. At Beef and Lamb, we get to see what the traffic's looking like on the different tools. nProve month after month, it's often number one, and if it's not, it's in the top 3 consistently. So we're really pleased to see it continuing to grow and becoming a more normalised part of discussion with commercial farmers. The other really cool thing about beef is that when we look in behind those statistics, there's the normal lumps that you'd expect to see seasonally due to the activities in both beef and sheep, but we're seeing really cool sort of bleed over from each species into the other. So we can see that a kick in beef is driving interest across to sheep, and the same in return. So pretty cool in terms of how that's been panning out. The other thing I should have said actually on that is, in those discussions that we had with beef breed societies and the likes of PBB, some pretty cool, I don't know, I guess you could almost sort of say design thinking conversations about how those tools work, and we've got a bunch of items from that we're looking forward to unpacking as well in terms of potential next steps of continuing to improve the usability of that tool. Staying on the public facing, and like Jason mentioned earlier, nProve Tracker is a big deal for us. Concept's been around in our organisation for a long time, definitely predates me, about taking that next step of making the genetic value or the proposition of those raw ingredients that commercial farmers are bringing in, making that a lot more real than what it is at the moment. I've been lucky enough to be in the back of some of your workshops, Sarah. We're talking through what breeding objectives are and where you want to go, but just like Jason said, the reality for most commercial farmers, it's incredibly difficult for them to understand where they are, which makes a path forward sometimes quite difficult. We got the opportunity with the Cool Sheep program to get this funded and off the ground, and that was fantastic, and it was really good too to get buy-in from MPI early on about the broadness that this tool needed to be. Before we went and built anything, we closed our mouths opened our ears and went out and did a bunch of workshops with commercial farmers, breeders, bureaus and others in industry. Got a lot of feedback in terms of what might work, what might not work. Then we built up a bunch of mock-ups. So it's not real software, but it's designed to look like real software, and we can use that to refine the design and get feedback. And then we built out the software that Sarah's going to show you this afternoon. One of the key things that came through, though, loud and clear from breeders and bureaus was that you'll see one of the cornerstone starting points for the tool is, you know, what are the raw inputs and making those clearly visible. And in order to do that, in order to be able to say what your sire team looks like, you need to know who those sires are. And then, you know, the question comes up, you know, how do we reliably get the information about those sires being purchased through into the hands of commercial farmers? So off the back of that feedback from breeders and bureaus, we've made sure that there's a real simple way that those email addresses of your clients can just be loaded straight into Seller nProve, and it will trigger an email that Sarah's going to show you that can then bring those sires into your client sire team. And the other thing I should say too is, although the conversation was about the tool, you know, there was a lot of feedback around what you saw your role was in terms of the services you were providing your clients, and that this seemed to be a logical extension of that. So hopefully we've left the door wide open for that. Definitely want to acknowledge a few people involved in this project. Sarah, massive hours, travelling around the countryside with Cynthia, doing workshops and getting feedback. Neville, in terms of the magic of the gene flow that sits in behind this and making sure that all that came together. Cynthia keeping things together at the top and making sure that we're all facing in the right direction. MPI, in terms of their early understanding and support of what was needed for this project. And finally, Andrew and his very clever crew at Map of Ag, Sally, Anita, Bay, Johnny, Robin, Kim and Naranjan, that have worked incredibly well behind the scenes to pull the tool together that Sarah will show you this afternoon. Just in terms of other things that have been going on, a few things here that are probably not quite so flashy, but in terms of the way we manage genotypes, we've done a big switch over behind the scenes for that. So now all of that information is all connected into the nProve platform, which we're transitioning across to from SIL. It's one of those projects that if you haven't heard about it, it probably means it went very well, and I think that's true for the vast majority of you in the room. But big job, and huge thanks, Abby, John, Michael, and our genotyping service providers and everybody else that supported that piece of work. So looking forward now, in terms of what's coming up, we talked to you last Sheep Breeder Forum about wanting to do a better job of putting, taking a step up in terms of the tools that we can give you for being able to see how things are going in terms of your connectedness to establish benchmarking. Thanks to everyone, many of you in the room, in terms of the feedback that we got in terms of what we showed. So I talked earlier about that reporting technology that we've got and the fact that we can now show things a bit more visually. So this is the first cab off the rank that we wanted to pick up. And so we've started work on that. But it was pretty interesting actually when we got into that with the breeder feedback, some comments from bureaus, but also some consulting work that had been done by Neville, and some work with breeders that Sharon had done as well around connectedness. What you'll see come out from us has changed a little bit. We'll still do something like this at a high level. We'll probably, again, try and move it away from just a table of numbers. There's a few ideas we've got to make this look a bit better. But we'll give you a report that's for your flock. But the thing that we've realised we need to evolve is that we think we've got a pretty cool way, and we got some really good feedback from the Sheep Genetics Advisory Group yesterday, in terms of showing you how you're connecting, not necessarily at the sire level, but at that higher level in terms of how you're connecting it at a flock level, because connectedness actually comes down to the number of recorded progeny for those connecting sires. The connected sires is just how that's achieved. And so we think we've got a pretty cool way of being able to show you that, both in terms of the recording that's supporting that in your own flock, and for each flock that you're connecting with, give you visibility into the recording that's holding that together on the other side as well, in a way where we can actually just do it visually with no numbers, I don't know, I go cross-eyed looking at that stuff for too long, so I think we might have something that's pretty good. So looking forward to rolling that out. We'll get an early version of that out to bureaus. We're aiming for the next 4 to 6 weeks, if that's something that interests you, let your bureau know, and you could be keen to get some early feedback from breeders as part of that. In terms of other things that are coming up, again in that theme of the key things that we need to do to move out of cell across to nProve, we've got data loading testing going on, heaps of work that Abby's leading behind the scenes on that. Thanks to Katie on the beef side of our organisation for a lot of the beef progeny test data that we've been loading into that system as well. And then we'll be working with bureaus next month in terms of testing, loading data into the nProve side of things as well. There's other things going on. We've got a lot of work readying and testing the genetic evaluation infrastructure and parentage. It's all been developed, but it's just a lot of thorough testing that we need to do. Like Rob said, yep, we are definitely needing to grow our infrastructure as well. So there's ongoing investments in there in terms of our data centres that we've got in New Zealand and also in the cloud. The last one is terms of use. Probably doesn't really excite anyone in this room, and to be honest, for Cynthia, Jason and I, it's probably not the most exciting meeting that we have, but it's a really important thing for us to get done. So we want to make sure that there's modern, updated terms of use there for nProve. It's not from our side, it's not about trying to push out any new policy or anything a bit like that. It's about visibility, including all the normal things around account usage, data accuracy, reasonable use of data. We've had feedback from breeders as well to make sure there's something in there about not misrepresenting data as well. Data access rights, flock ownership controls, things like that, and trying to get that balance right between legalese and making sure the thing's readable. So to wrap up, basically, you know, this is your platform, connecting breeders, bureaus, genotyping service providers with the know-how of the science team you heard about earlier, to all of our ultimate customer, who is commercial farmers, to continue New Zealand's remarkable genic gain story in sheep. Big thanks to the dedicated crew behind that, our Sheep Genetics Advisory Group, breeders, many of you in the room, for all of your feedback, along with bureaus, our genotyping service providers and the talented crew behind the scenes, many of who you've heard of today, but there's plenty more that you haven't, including those that work throughout all of this change to make sure that things stay stable behind the scenes and that NZGE comes out every week on time. Finally, thanks to our commercial farmers, levy payers, who definitely pay for the majority of what you're seeing here today. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome, thanks team. And now, Danny, we're going to move into some quick fire updates from our team of subject matter experts. I'll hand it over to you, Danny.
Yes, so first of all, we'll do a quick fire, 5 minutes roughly per session, and then afterwards you can ask questions. So hold your questions, write them down, and we'll start with sharing regarding facial eczema connectedness.
So I track all the connectedness from week to week, and in January we changed the connectedness period, which is 3 years before. And so we had about 34 or so connected flocks for FE in December, and then we went to January and it dropped to 16. And this is an outcome of, we used to have a central progeny test where those very crucial across-breed connections would be done. And with that not happening in recent years, we end up with isolated groups of Coopworths, Perindales, Romneys, and no one is connecting those things. So a discussion was had that this is such a trait that needs to be visible and very visible for buyers. And the decision was made that we would temporarily extend the connectedness window from 3 years to 4 years, which would maintain visibility of FE values. That this wasn't universally welcome, I'd have to say, and we do appreciate your viewpoint. But we've also been working with groups with Wiltshires and Coopworths and Perrindales, and working with them to trying to get a plan together of what progeny they had on the ground so we could reconnect before next year. And for some times there weren't progeny, and it's going to take a wee bit longer. But it's such an important trait that we want to give all the assistance we can. Right, next, Ram Guard.
Good morning. So yeah, I'm going to talk to you about this problem that we've got of replacing Ram Guard. So I have been talking about this for a while and at previous forums as well. Our goal is still the same, that we do want to find an alternative to the current Ram Guard test. We want something that won't harm the animals. We want something that will identify those tolerant animals but won't impact the genetic gain we've already made. And then we want it to be reliable and affordable, obviously. We want to get the same result every time. I mean, if we did have something that caused no harm and identified those tolerant animals and was reliable but wasn't as affordable, I think we could move on that. I think we've decided that we'd rather have that rather than it be super affordable. But the reason we want to get that cost down is so more animals can go through that program as well. So we've previously tried to develop this a biomarker test, and that work started in, I think it was 2021. And as we progressed through the research, it was looking good, but then it just didn't hold up. So we have stopped that piece of research, but we've got 2 more pieces of work happening at the moment. The first one is called Cell Viability Assay, and that's been carried out by BSI, formerly Ag Research. I think that's what they're calling themselves now. And it's looking at how do the cells perform if you get cells out of the animal, put them in the lab, what do they do in the face of the sporodesmum? Do they live or do they die? So the initial work for this is looking promising in terms of there's a good cell dose response. Now it is getting into those real world samples to see if that still holds up. So that work's continuing. And then our other project is looking at cell responses to the toxin to identify those tolerant markers or tolerant animals. So it is a biomarker approach again, but it's at a much more granular level, and we're also understanding something about the immune system and response to the sporodesmum while we do this as well. For this project, that is being run by CSIRO in Australia, but with BSI helping us out in terms of the Ramguard part of it, because we are dosing naive animals to get these samples out of the animals, and also BSI have been processing those samples prior to going over to Australia as well. So we have done that sampling December to March this year, so we've tested 80 animals that were naive through the Ramguard program, and those samples are currently winging their way to Australia. So we hope to find out within the next 6 months if this work looks like there's anything in it, and then it will be more time to find out if it's promising. So it's been a bit of a roller coaster, this project particularly. Science really moves in straight lines, but it does always move forward, and we're always learning new things. So we don't have a replacement yet, but it is really a key focus, and we know how important it is, particularly to the people in this room, but also for the New Zealand sheep industry and cattle as well. So really appreciate all the support and knowledge of the people who have helped with this project so far, and we are still going. That's all I got.
So I'm going to talk about IMF via ultrasound. So we've done a fantastic job of lifting the performance of our animals, but it was at the expense of removing quite a lot of fat from them and getting our bigger carcasses. So there's been a big research effort looking into how do we maintain or improve the eating quality of our meat, and there's been a module available in nProve for a long time that measures IMF, meat pH, meat colour, and shear force. And of those, IMF is the one that's probably captured the imagination of people. Obviously, IMF in beef is a big key trait, and so on this, there's been a lot of for every trait, there's either research push trying to say we need to measure this trait, or farmer pull. And on this one, there's probably more farmer pull about get something done on this than they have on a lot of the traits that we measure. The problem is that there have been all sorts of scientists and companies that have jumped and wanted to get a technology in to measure IMF, and mostly it's measured in an animal after slaughter, which makes it rather limiting when you want to use those animals to breed. So the long-suffering Michael Lee also pleaded that we don't create another meat module where we've got lots and lots of traits that only have a small number of measurements. So in the evaluation system, we were able to kind of shoehorn them together as a single trait and make it so that additional ones come in. And Jason's already talked about this in his talk, but what we would really like to get is something that we can use in live animals. So CT, we can measure that there, but it's a really expensive technology, and the impact in terms of the number of animals that go through isn't really that great because of the cost limitation. So there has been interest in measuring IMF, and so we looked at, with the CPT program, we were able to evaluate 3 suppliers and to see whether they met the quality criteria that we had for incorporation, and 2 of them did and 1 didn't, which brought along with it its own angst, which Jason has already mentioned. So the way that we're dealing with it is baby steps, and I'll get on to that in a minute, but for the 2 that were able to pass the goals that we had set after going through this very expensive evaluation, their measurements are able to be fed in, and we're developing it so that hopefully in the V8 release in the middle of the year, those 2 traits will go in and help predict IMF, so that information can go to inform the IMF BV. So we'll be using the same mechanism that we've got for all the other measures, feeding that information in and coming up with just 1 IMF breeding value that will include that. And that's fantastic because ultrasound is relatively cheap and it can be done on live animals on the farm. So there's lots of benefits there. The other thing that we've got with all of the meat quality traits, when we've been doing it, they're quite different in the implementation in that most animals are on a progeny test flock and are slaughtered, so the measurements aren't collected in the home flocks where the rams come from, so that means that our standard connectedness criteria don't apply, and when we have a connectedness target to have those shown in public nProve, it obviously doesn't meet that. So we're also trying to implement, if there are genomic connections, can we actually come up with a connectedness statistic that will allow us to show the connected flocks and be able to make those more publicly available. So the big finding out of the ultrasound measure is that it is very operator dependent, and so while 2 of the operators passed, we would need to re-evaluate them if they sold the business and have another operator coming in. So it really is dependent on the person being able to accurately do it while they're there. Jason's already said this, we would like to get some system that takes the operator out of that. There's talk of AI, but there's lots of image processing things that could be done if the ultrasound images are captured and then removed and analysed on a computer. So Jason has a great big shopping list on his Vision 35 list of goals there, and IMF was ranked at number 3 on that. So we're hopeful that we can do some work where we can get around this operator limitation and hopefully find a way that we can basically get that so it's technology dependent, not dependent on the operator. So it's very much a watch this space, but we hope that in a year or 2 we'll be reporting that ultrasound can be collected, the images can be analysed by a system that we know that delivers a quality result, and that can go into the genetic evaluation.
So my topic is shedding. This is something I've been involved with since it started and really enjoy, and we've had tremendous cooperation from the shedding people. It's a very new area, and it's something that sounds very simple, but when you get into it, there seems to be a lot more to it and a lot we don't know. So at the moment we're looking at standing the lamb shedding BV up in V8, and that'll be available in August. Timothy Bilton has done, there's two Timothys and I do get them confused. He's done a lot of work with improving the model. We've got a much bigger data set that's been recorded, and we're very confident in those BVs that are going out. The breeders would also like a adult shedding score, and they've been very cooperative in recording the data, because it's always the chicken and egg. We can't have a BV until we've got a data set to work out what are the genetic parameters. But in terms of the stuff we don't know still, there's been some international collaboration. We've had some of the ag research team and our colleagues overseas, and they were talking about the day length effect, because obviously it's regulated by day length. And we have the summer equinox at Christmas time. So we've introduced a new option where shedding breeders can record more than one score on the animals. If you're a score pre-Christmas, pre-equinox, you can get greater variability of who's shed and who hasn't. But then other people want to know, do they ultimately shed completely? In which case they want to take a score in February or March. So now we have a system where we're using one score currently in the evaluation, but you have the ability to score multiple times over the season and just record that with the date. And that'll give us a better data set so we can understand this trait better. Yep, and we'll work towards adult shedding scores. Interestingly, our overseas colleagues only provide an adult shedding score, and we've gone down the track of a lamb shedding score. Thank you.
So to give you guys a bit of background on why BLG got us to do this piece of work, at the moment in terms of traits around the animal's response to parasites, there are a few options. A few of you in this room are recording them at the moment. You've got worm FEC, which is fecal egg count. You've got CALA, which is the salivary immune response to incoming parasites. And then there's also the resilience protocol as well. So initially the work, the last time the heritabilities were calculated for the fecal egg count was back in 2012 by Natalie as part of her PhD work. And it was about then that the CALA genetic parameters were estimated as well. So at that time they calculated a correlation between FEC and CALA, but that was on, I think, only about 500 animals. So there's been a real push to kind of understand how all of these traits genetically are related to one another. So as part of this work, and in the CPT, we've been measuring FEC for a while, but the last few years we've been measuring CALA as well. So as part of this work, took all of the information available on nProve and re-estimated those genetic parameters. So what that means in terms of practical results is we have updated heritabilities and updated genetic correlations. So the first one is the FEC versus CALA. So the heritability of the two fecal egg count traits were pretty much the same as last time, so sitting around moderately heritable traits, around 0.25 for both summer and autumn FEC. And then CALA heritability was about the same at about 0.25. One of the questions that I think is often asked is, can CALA be put into the worm FEC module? And so that's why we needed to understand the genetic correlation, because if the correlation is high, it means it can easily be put in. The correlation that we estimated from this data set was moderate to low, so it was negative, which means that it's negative, which means it's positive, so a higher fecal egg count means lower CALA, but that weaker genetic correlation means that it's harder to put it into the worm FEC module as a predictor trait. But you can still get breeding values if you are measuring and selecting on CALA. We also had a look at the resilience-related traits. They are slightly more complicated. If anyone's recording the resilience protocol, you'll know that. Looked at the heritability for age at first drench, which was a 0.14, which fits with the last time it was calculated, which was a little bit before 2012. I can't remember exactly when. And we also looked at R gain, which is live weight gain during the resilience protocol. And so the heritability, once again, for that was lower at 0.15. Interestingly, what we found, and the last time the resilience protocol was looked at, they found the same thing as well, is that there's a strong genetic correlation between drench and DAG score. So if you're recording on selecting on DAG score, you'll be making progress on age at first drench inadvertently. There were also a couple of other traits that we looked at because they were in the data set. So some of the breeders have been recording live weight when they are doing the fecal egg counts as well. So at the moment have just called these Algain1 and Algain2. That's just growth under FEC1 challenge and growth under FEC2 challenge as well. So they were reasonably heritable, 0.23 for the growth under FEC1 and 0.37 for growth under FEC2. And we found unsurprisingly moderate positive correlations with weight and muscling traits because they're all size-related traits. The correlations with FEC were negligible, with the parasite burdens. So this is very much just a first look. I know a lot of people are quite keen to get a new resilience protocol, and probably one of the things we'd encourage people is to, if you are doing fecal egg count, take a live weight at the time of recording as well. There is a bit more we need to do to understand the relationship between live weight 8 and these growth under challenge traits, but as scientists, the more data, the better. So if anyone recording FEC can record live weight as well, that would be great. And that will allow us to try and separate out these growth versus challenge effects. Is there more? No, that's it. Cool. Oh, the other thing to note is that fecal egg count does have a small but negative correlation with some of the weight traits. It's if you are selecting on maternal worth or growth and fecal egg count, you can get around that. But there is that widely held industry perception that animals that are resistant to parasites aren't going to grow. Use index selection to get around that. But it does also mean that if you're not selecting on fecal egg count in particular, and you are selecting heavily on growth, and we can see this in genetic trends graphs, is that resistance is going to slowly decline if you aren't recording and selecting on parasite traits. We see that in the national genetic trends graph, which has been reversed probably because there's more people recording and selecting on FEC, but it's just something to be aware of as well. And then I'll hand over to Tricia to talk about feed efficiency.
Good morning, everyone. So we have been looking at the trait of feed efficiency in sheep at Invermay for close on a decade now, and the first animals that we put through a decade ago were sourced from the central progeny test, and so that was able to help us, together with some other data sets, really develop the idea that feed efficiency is a highly heritable trait in our New Zealand sheep population, so heritability of about 0.42. A few years after that, we were able to go through and put animals, and many of yours that participated in the low input progeny test also came through. And so we have a data set of about 1,600 animals that we refer to as our historic data set, which I'll come to in a minute. But what we've had over the last couple of years is the opportunity to actually start remeasuring animals from the central progeny test through our facility at Invermay. So last year was the first year that they were measured. That funding has come through a international consortia, Sustained Sheep, that is funded by MPI in conjunction with Beef and Lamb New Zealand Genetics Support. And so we have put through our first 200 last year, and as of August this year, we will be putting through another cohort of 200. And so this is just a little bit of a plug if anybody happens to be driving through Mosgiel kind of September, early October this coming season. They have a ram in the CPT, or you're just generally interested, is get in touch and we will take you up and show you the facility. Some of the really interesting traits that kind of come through when we have the ability to measure feed intake through our facility is looking at some of the feeding behaviour traits. We find that some of the traits like nibblers and guzzlers that have very different feeding patterns are quite highly heritable as well. And so it's really just giving us a chance to really get back into collecting some of that data and looking at some of those traits. We've heard from Jason already this morning and Rob as well that these type of traits are really, really important when we think about our genomic selection because they are expensive and hard to measure. And so we will be really looking to use this data set that's coming through again as our underpinning for the future to really get some of those feed efficiency traits coming through at the same time as measuring methane alongside. One of the things when I talk about feed efficiency though is we've heard quite a lot today that to really put these into indexes we need to know all of the genetic correlations between our trait of interest and everything else that we're measuring. When we did those first 1,600 animals, they were young animals that didn't have their lifetime, they were all ewe lambs, but we didn't have their lifetime production data on them. And so as part of that sustained sheep that's funding everything at the moment, we'll also be, we've got a scientist actually looking through and taking all of that lifetime production data that came with those first 1,600. So body condition score across their lifetime, number of lambs born, maternal weaning weight traits, to really get a good handle on what some of those genetic correlations are across the suite of traits that we're interested in that can be then used to really get this feed efficiency trait across the line into our genetic evaluations. Thank you.
Well, thank you everyone for outlining that, and of course that work wouldn't be possible with a whole lot of help from partners to make this all, so I would like to acknowledge those as well. So that it is from us. Any questions?
Well, look, show our appreciation for the panel. Thank you. And look, so far, this is the record so far for questions on Slido, so well done, team. You guys are into it. So, Neville, we've got the most likes for you. Is there a correlation between IMF and the C measurement on an ultrasound eye muscle scan?
So we haven't looked at that specifically, but almost certainly, because all the fat traits are, a lean animal is lean universally and a fat animal is fat universally, but in the genetic correlation with total fatness is not one, so it is possible that you can try and lift the amount of IMF and maintain the amount of fatness that they have in the carcass.
Thanks, Neville. And so, look, the second question is that we're really vulnerable with regards to muscle scanning, so very few scanners. Would subsidised training or purchase of equipment be possible?
I'm not going to say yes or no to that, but it's a good question you raise, and it's something we can give thought to. As beef and lamb, we've got to think about things from our levy payer viewpoint and just run a few metrics about market failure and that sort of thing through there. But if it's a big enough issue that we need to step in and do something, then we can certainly look at that.
Thanks, Jason. What just swapped on me. What current economic rewards are factored into the IMF, please?
Yep, so in terms of the index, what we've done is modelled a grading system that does reward for that, but the benefit is relatively small. If you actually look in industry, there are some supply chain type things where there's a premium being paid for IMF, but largely the industry isn't benefited from that. But there's a lot of interest in instrumentation that you can put into a plant for IMF, so it's a little bit like yield grading. It's going to come. It's going. Is it going to be 1 year? Is it going to be 5 years or 10 years? We don't know, but it's coming. So the ability for a breeder to select for that and hopefully benefit from it in the future is there. And when that happens, then the weighting on IMF would go up because we'd actually have grading information to put it. So it's moving in the right direction.
And the second one to that, can we increase eating quality of lamb without increasing IMF? So lamb is already viewed as a fatty meat, so is making it more fatty moving in the right direction?
So at the BSI, we've done quite a bit of work over the last number of years, and I'm trying not to see Rob Banks when I'm saying this next part of it. The Australians have also been doing quite a lot of work in the meat quality space, And some of the work that we did a few years ago now was looking at taste panel assessment of our meat, and we really strongly showed that there is a really strong relationship between consumer taste panel acceptance and likability of New Zealand lamb and our intramuscular fat content. Because of the way we have been taking our fat off for such a long time, we've actually got below a critical threshold in terms of that intramuscular fat. The target levels that we identified through that research were only around that 3–3.5% IMF as being the target to ensure good eating quality, certainly not going down the Wagyu direction. But also some of the work we've shown, and Neville talked to it before, is the fact that subcutaneous or fat depth C and intramuscular fat, that genetic relationship is not one. It's actually 0.6, 0.7, and so we can actually make selection pressure in both directions if both traits are measured. But that really key part does come down to intramuscular fat being something that has been strongly identified in both New Zealand and Australian taste panel work as being really critical to ensuring that meat eating quality.
Thanks, Trish. Michael?
So this is a question about markers on snip chips. In terms of shedding is probably a trait that has probably got quite a few single big QTL, so single genes affecting the trait. But I don't think as yet things have been identified, so we can't put the markers on the chips. But having said that, I know that there's a lot of other QTL that have been identified, and I'd suggest you probably ask Shannon Clark about that, because she's been plugging away at that for many years. And yeah, and there's a lot of traits, like particularly in meat eating quality and a yield in that. So talk to Shannon about that if you're really interested.
So the question, can we piggyback off other industries such as pork? The thing that's different about lamb is that we're starting off a very low base. So if you look at the evaluation in cattle, it's a bit easier because they have a higher mean level, whereas lamb, the values that Tricia just mentioned, sort of that 3, you don't really see any trace marbling in lamb until it hits about 4%. So as we increase marbling, it will actually, the amount of intramuscular fat, it will actually be easier to measure because there's just more of it. So we are sort of in a unique situation. But just repeating what Tricia said, we're not really trying to make Wagyu lamb, or that's not really. It's just having enough there that we get the eating quality benefit. So it's kind of in a, it needs a slightly different approach to be able to deal with that.
So I can probably cover a couple of quick questions. So yes, if I was a shedding flock, I would be recording at weaning, and I would probably record again in January, February, March. Only one of those will currently be used, but it'll help us answer the question about the impact of the equinox and full shed versus partial shed. The second one is about the wool length. Yes, you can record the wool length. So I think there's lamb length and hogget length and ewe length, and that's the length of wool in centimetres or millimetres. I have to check on that. That they shed, because some people don't want large amounts of wool around their farm, or if they don't shed everything, if it's just a very short amount. So you can already currently record that.
So will scanners that didn't make the IMF cut be able to be qualified in the future? Potentially, yes. There are 2 other technologies that we know of, one in implant and one in an on-farm that uses magnetic resonance, that would also like to be included. So there are other forms there. It is really expensive to measure because it has to be calibrated against the gold standard of wet chemistry, which you have to generate animals and you have to collect samples and do the fat extraction, which is really expensive. So when that's done, then the wise thing to do is to try and reevaluate or evaluate as many technologies at the same time. So there is potential, but Jason mentioned it and I talked about it. We would like to get it so that that we can actually make it so that any ultrasound scanner is able to offer that service and be able to process the images to be able to get that included.
From memory, the proportion of flocks recording wormfleck is about 120, and I think the total DP flocks is around 360, 380. So it's increased noticeably in recent years.
The question about those who have invested heavily in IMF via CT and genomics, how do you make it so that the cheap measurements, you can compete? There is a little bit that Rob said, that there is if we want to use, or Jason as well, if we want to use genomics widely, there is a benefit. This is a trait that would benefit from genomics really well. I know that's not in the question, but having some sort of system where people can measure without taking any of those things and getting a benefit, that's something to consider, and others have talked about that. The answer to this question, though, is that although it's highly genetically correlated, there's not as much noise, so those people who are doing the more expensive traits will still make a bit more gain out of doing those things. So it's kind of a horses for courses in that. Oh, yeah, and using genomic connectedness, so we're looking at that at the moment. Part of the problem is, once again, the old chestnut of we don't have genomic accuracies, and that's something to be able just to know how accurate the breeding value is and how much spread we're seeing in the breeding value. So we're working through that and trying to come up with a threshold of how much genomics you actually need to have, whether it's only whole flock or if people are doing a subset of their flock. Is the connections from that enough to see a spread in breeding values, which we believe shows the true difference in genetic merit. So there's work on that, and we're looking at using genomics to do that.
So shedding is not limited to any particular breeds. I know there's Texels that shed, there are terminal sires that shed. If anyone wants to record it, they're more than welcome.
The first one is that yes, the genetic correlation between FEC and CALA was statistically significant. It was just relatively low, which means they had different traits, which we sort of already knew. From memory, but you can come and find me afterwards and I can double check, sheep with the genetic correlation between CALA and DAG was non-existent. And I can't remember the phenotypic correlation, sorry. CALA wasn't actually genetically correlated with any of the other traits from memory. Danny, can you remember? And then the question down the bottom is what is the extra gain in worm resistance from selecting for FEC and CALA at the same time versus selecting for one or the other. So FEC is obviously what comes out the other end. CALA is the response to the incoming parasites. They are both the response to parasites. They're just slightly different parts. They are overlapping, but they're slightly different. In terms of your breeding values through to indexes at the moment, my understanding, at least from Neville, is that the CALA index is based on that relationship with FEC. So the FEC index is based on some modelling that John McEwen and Dave Lethwick did around looking at if you reduce eggs on pasture, what is the overall flock benefit of the gradual reduction over time. As has been talked about before today, we can see lots of genetic variation in a lot of traits, but what it comes down to is what is the economic value on farm. So at the moment, those are the models that we use with the parasite traits, is that model around eggs on pasture and the impact that we know that eating those larvae has on sheep. So at the moment, if you select on both of them in terms of index, it'll be based on fecal egg count.
Catherine, the work you did looking at the different internal parasite traits, does that get us any closer to being able to a protocol to identify animals that exhibit resistance and resilience in the same animal?
Yes, well, it depends on how you define resilience, I guess, which I think is one of my bugbears, is that everybody defines it resilience differently. growth under an animal's ability to perform under challenge is both in terms of its growth and its production, but also with response to parasites, you're wanting to limit the damage it's causing the entire flock as well. So there are in the literature some different protocols that could be used, but they're even more intensive than the current ones are as well. So that's sort of part of the next step of that work, I think, is actually sitting down and having a discussion about what resilience means to you as breeders and how we would actually measure that.
If I can just add one thing to the Kala and FEC thing, all of the indexes are supposed to be weighted, so it's the value of a 1 unit change independent of all other traits. With Kala, because it's not done in the same module, we can't do that, so it's kind of a little anomaly. So you shouldn't be using the Kala index and the FEC index together. You kind of need to make a decision, look at one or look at the other, because it doesn't account for the double counting.
So the question around the feed efficiency and bioeconomic modelling, we haven't done anything recently on this. I suspect it will be part of the initiative that is coming up, but a number of years ago now, Abacus commissioned a very deep trait prioritisation initiative that kind of took into account a lot of aspects of possibly not a full bioeconomic modelling, would it have been? Close.
Not a deep.
Deep, semi-deep. And it ranked as one of the very high priority traits in terms of the value it could add. So I don't know who wants to answer the next one? The facial eczema one. I guess I can answer it from one aspect and then we'll send it down to Cara for the other. I guess for now we have the social licence to continue using RamGuard. We know all of the limitations of it that we have heard today. I guess one of the things that we will be looking to ensure that social licence, and a few of the facial eczema breeders have heard me talk about it, is that if we're going to continue to have that social licence, we need to be making the fastest rates of genetic gain we can possibly, using RamGuard in its current form, to be able to kind of continue to justify that. And so that means getting the connectedness right, making sure we're measuring the animals, and then critically including that genomic selection as part of that basket to really fast track our rates of genetic gain in facial eczema tolerance.
Can I just jump in on that one? The backup plan is genomics. And if anyone is measuring facial eczema but isn't genotyping their animals, can we please talk?
Look, team, I'm going to have to call it to a close there. But look, I'd like to thank you very much, and we'll put those other remaining questions into the parking lot, or alternatively, I'm sure the team here won't mind you catching up with them over lunch to ask that specifically. Look, can we please just show our appreciation for the panel?